Today, we have Blake. Blake spent nearly 15 years working in QA, software testing, certification testing, all of the quality assurance work behind the scenes. He'd been at the same company for 8 years, deep into a career that just wasn't lighting him up anymore. The industry was obviously shifting, and Blake hit a point in his 40s where he knew that if he was going to make a change, it had to happen right now. So he went all in. He joined the Cloud Engineer Academy, even though he was already deep into his tech career and made the pivot. Today, Blake works as a cloud engineer for a US government contractor, supporting over 350 science labs across the US, building out their infrastructure, handling security, and doing the kind of meaningful, high impact work that he was searching for the whole time. We are going to cover his full journey, what made him finally take the leap after years of thinking about it, how he broke out of QA, the interview processes, and the mindset shift that got him there. And if you want my help breaking into cloud and getting results like Blake and everyone else on the channel, then just click the link in the description below and let's see how we can help you. Enjoy the video. Peace. So, welcome, Blake. It's great to have you here and really excited to go through your transformation that you've been on. What I remember most about you is that you would always join the live coaching calls. You'd have your camera on and you would engage, right? Which is really, really important. So you'd ask questions, but then you'd also execute on the feedback. And I always say of all the successful students that we have, this single trait is the most common one. And that's certainly what you had. So before we get into like the massive win, just take me back to where you were before the academy. What were you doing? What was the role? All that kind of stuff.
Okay. So my background was primarily in QA or some type of certification testing over the years. So I had been working in QA for, I want to say almost 15, like 14-ish years, but it was really sort of a mix. That was the thing, is that my background was varied because of the different roles and the different demands of the roles and the interests that I had over the years. And so I had gotten into networking. I ended up doing some cloud work actually as well, and even security. And that was sort of the direction I was trying to move into, but it was a bit of a struggle to do so. So the company that I was at prior to the current company that I'm at now, I had been there for about 8 years before I left. But I think leading it up to the last couple of years, I was thinking to myself that something had to change. And so I started looking around for something that would allow me that availability for that transition. And that's actually when I came across your program.
Okay, nice. So you were doing QA for a number of years. What made you decide that you don't want to do this anymore? I'm guessing you were maybe frustrated. Were you stuck? Like, what was going on for you to say, you know what, something has to change?
Yeah, I mean, frustrated and yeah, having that willingness to change, that pivot. The industry has just changed so much. I think from a standpoint of quality, a lot of people have transitioned from wanting that quality experience to wanting a quality checkbox.
Mhm.
And I'd seen that across the industry as a whole. I mean, there was a time when quality was more praised than it is now, and fighting for the customer experience was something more meaningful. And that's
Mm.
what I really liked about that role. I thought, well, if I can get to a point where I can convince the company to do something better for the experience. I mean, that's what I would want. I would want an advocate for myself, but that just shifted quite a bit, and everybody wanted speed over true quality. And I just thought, well, what I liked about the role was shifting, and there was diminishing returns in the experience, and so I thought I needed something different and something more meaningful. My daughter was born in 2020, and I thought I wanted something that would help, um, yeah, skill set wise, that would help maybe towards her generation, work better towards her generation. And so I found security, I found cloud, and then I found out that you could actually combine the two.
Yeah.
And I was kind of excited about that, especially because the transition into doing that work was very natural.
Mm.
I'd worked with DevOps and cloud people for a number of years. I'd done a lot of different work involving both. And so it just felt like a very easy transition. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. So typical QA roles, you work with other engineering teams all the time and different skill sets. So you would have seen what those guys do day to day. And I guess that piqued your interest, right? And what did
Yeah.
you think specifically? Okay, I have to go to the cloud route because you could have gone obviously software, you're doing QA there, cybersecurity, networking. Why cloud specifically?
So cloud, because, well, specifically here, let me back up real quick.
Yeah.
So when I was first looking at different roles, someone brought up cybersecurity to me, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting because a lot of the work that they do in cybersecurity seemed like a good pivot point for QA, because there's a lot that tie together the way you write up issues and reporting and whatnot. And I started looking at that, but then I realized that it was still kind of too niche and I might get stuck in a very similar circumstances I was with QA.
Mm.
And so I started to chat with some other people that I was working with. I started looking online. I saw a lot of people that were saying, cybersecurity is great, but really I should have learned cloud first. And that was actually a very resounding message across pretty much everybody. And anyone who was even in cybersecurity who regularly advertised their work on social media, everybody was saying, well, I really wish I had learned cloud first. And then I realized why that was. And it's just because it's so much more broad.
Mhm.
And I actually worked very closely with a couple of cloud DevOps platform engineers with my job, and the work that they were doing day to day felt more impactful as well. And it's not to say that cybersecurity isn't, because that's still the route I want to go. I want to do cloud security, or
Yeah.
DevSecOps. But it was more focused on looking at the larger picture of things, and I actually prefer that myself.
Mm.
I do like details. I mean, that's what QA is all about, is finding those details. But being able to look at the broader scope actually seemed a lot more critical and something that I would be able to help benefit others with more. And also, infrastructure is just so interesting.
Yeah.
I look at people who have a heavy coding background, and I think to myself, no, I don't want to write code every single day, all day
Mm.
long. And configuration is just very different. You're looking at design of architecture, you're configuring systems, which is more declarative in nature. And because it's declarative, I'm not just writing assembly code all day long and having to build up a program that just takes lines and lines and lines of code. And that aspect of things seemed a lot more intriguing to me, especially because then you can tie into security. And yes, I mean you're still writing scripts, but that's very different from building up a program.
Yeah, it's way more collaborative, I would say,
Yeah,
working in cloud and being deep in the IDE all the time. You speak to a lot of people, you speak to customers, you understand requirements. It's actually very similar to QA, but it's like a
mhm,
different part of the process.
yeah.
So on the build process, really. But okay, so you decided that you're going to go the cloud route. You did the research, you spoke to people, cybersecurity. They said, okay, do cloud first. So what did you do on your own to kind of pursue that before you found like the academy and stuff?
Yeah, so my company at the time, they had introduced AWS Skill Builder, and so I first started looking at that, and I was just kind of generally curious about, what is it that I can learn? And
Mm.
AWS was just such a giant that I thought, well, I mean, if we have the resources to learn some of the information, great. They weren't sponsoring any certifications for the peons, such as myself, but they had done it for a number of the other more advanced engineers, who were like the senior coding level engineers,
Yeah.
and they all said, yeah, it was interesting. It was kind of business, kind of tech, and so I thought, okay, well, I'll do it myself. I got my feet wet with that. I got my feet wet with a little bit of the security, and then I started really digging in because I thought it was very interesting. And at that point, though, because the company wasn't really sponsoring any of that, I just started looking on my own. I looked around for a lot of different programs. A lot of people weren't really offering what I wanted. It was because the programs were far too large, and there felt like the information was a little outdated. And I actually came across your program, and you were still building it up at the time. I think
Yeah.
you were on like week 10 or so of it.
Yeah.
And that actually felt a lot more exciting to me because you were regularly adding your knowledge to this program and creating new videos, new content, new write-ups, and new diagrams, etc. And I thought, well, this is actually a good opportunity because now I'm getting stuff that's fresh,
Mm,
fresh and a lot more exciting. So that's why I ended up with your program over
okay.
everybody else. Yeah.
Nice, nice. So you basically you decided to do cloud. You tried some stuff yourself just to make sure that this is what you want to do. I guess you liked that initial learning period that you had, but then it was like,
Yeah.
okay, I need to now go a little bit deeper, more structure, more accountability,
Mhm.
and like more later stuff. And that's how you came across the academy. And then I'm guessing you found the academy via the YouTube channel.
I did. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice. What made you pull the actual trigger and join rather than just keep watching like the free content and the YouTube stuff and from the outside like a lot of people do?
Yeah, I'm not one to linger too much on decisions because I've done that before and then I just let opportunities slip by. And that when I was younger, and I'm
Mhm.
kind of an old man in tech now. And so that was something that I thought to myself, well, I need to make this transition. I need this to happen relatively soon. You know, I'm in my 40s. If I'm going to do any kind of career pivot, it needs to happen. So I need to not just watch videos on people advertising their products for too long. I need to do the research,
Yeah.
dig in. Like I said, I looked at several, and I think it was actually one video in particular where you were kind of talking about the landscape and how it was shifting and the market as a whole, where you talk about the growth of cloud over the next several years.
Yeah.
And that kind of convinced me after I did my own research to confirm that it was true. It's not that I don't trust you or anybody
Yeah,
else,
yeah.
it's just my process. So,
Yeah, and
yeah.
that's how it should be done. Like you do your research, you get the information, and then still triple check. So now, based on we're going a little bit off track, but what's that growth been like in cloud? Do you still agree that cloud is growing since you made that decision?
Yeah, actually, I
Okay.
mean, I see it a lot, especially in the space that I'm in, because private sector has done a lot of migration work, and so they more need the experts who've been doing this for several years. I went into the more like public sector, so I
Mhm.
work for a government contractor, and they're still doing a lot of migration work. You know, the technology has a lot more regulation around it, and so I actually got in at a pretty good time because I'm on a team right now where I work with 350 plus science labs around the US,
Mhm.
and they have varying needs. A lot of cloud related support, DevOps support, but there's several of them that are migrating right now. And so it gives me an opportunity to see it from that perspective, along
Yeah.
with people who have already done so and just need, you know, certain services up and running.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So when you joined and you pulled a trigger, what was that experience like for you once you were in? Like what stood out for you the most?
I think the expectation really. So I kind of knew what I was looking at going in, but I joined a program that was sort of a mix of a couple different roles, and I thought to myself, well, I'm going to make the best of this that I can,
Yeah.
and so I'm going to just push for doing the cloud work. But I didn't know what it would entail, and in GovCloud is what the coin is, the term coined is. Um, you're missing a lot of features in AWS. And so you have to figure out how to build services from scratch, which ironically I said I didn't want to do a ton of code, but I was doing a
Yeah.
ton of scripting because
Yeah.
of that. And that actually was a very good opportunity though, because it let me show others what I was capable of, and that the previous titles that I had was not indicative of the work that I was capable of doing.
Yeah. So you showed that
And
you had the ability and the skill sets to even build things from scratch.
yeah, and it was interesting because they had kind of tossed the idea around of me becoming a lead because communication is incredibly important in that space,
Mhm.
and proactive people. And I was both because I just wanted to get things done and show what I was capable of and as quickly as I possibly could. So I was very, very driven on trying to accomplish every single goal that was set out in front of me. And that was sort of eye-opening for me
Mm.
personally, because after I went through the academy, I didn't know where I stood. I
Yeah,
thought to myself, well, I did all this work, I did these projects, I did the posting, like Sully said, and all those things actually helped me get the traction that I wanted. But then when I got into the role, I thought, am I going to be able to prove myself with this knowledge?
yeah,
And, imposter syndrome, I think, is just a very common thing. And I was dealing with that. And then as soon as I started doing the work, I realized, oh, I can do this.
of course.
All right. This,
Yeah,
this, this is something that is actually very possible now, especially because I had that foundation. Had I not had that foundation, I would have probably been struggling, because this actually cloud is quite intricate. There's so much to it. And it's not just the cloud technologies, but there's networking that you have to take into consideration. There is the scripting, especially if you're building out features, and there's different components. There is the security component as well. There's understanding configuration. There's understanding the architecture from a much broader perspective.
yeah.
And even if you're not the one who's doing the architecting and designing, you still have to understand how all of that works so that you
Mhm.
can contribute properly to each individual project that you're working on.
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. And when you joined, was it, I'm guessing obviously part of it, a lot of it was technical knowledge, but what about like your mindset and the accountability? At what point did you realize that, okay, this is difficult or this is easy, or like did something click for you in the academy that, okay, like this is it, I'm going all in?
I think so. I think for the first 2, 3 weeks, I was sort of lingering. I
Mm.
didn't really know what I
Yeah.
was doing with myself,
Yeah.
and I was kind of following some of the lessons, but I wasn't interacting with people a ton. I mean, I was pretty vocal, like right as I started, just as an intro, but then I got a little quiet,
Mm.
and it was through seeing other people who had attended the calls that you were having and having the conversations about the technology and realizing that I didn't really need to know everything. I just
Mm.
needed to participate so that I could start utilizing that knowledge and making sure that if I was going to have a conversation with someone, that I knew more than just to generalize. And that was something that, like I said, I think I was a few weeks in, and it hit me that I needed to participate more.
Yeah.
Not just that I wanted to or didn't want to. It was more of a need,
Yeah.
and it was so that I could better prepare myself, because like I said, I needed to take this transition seriously. This is something that I really wanted to do, and you were very proactive in trying to get people to participate. I mean, you were popping into these meetings instead of just going into a meeting and talking at people. You wanted participation as well, and I felt that was a lot more meaningful. Um, and so then I jumped in.
Yeah, and that's really, really important because a lot of people do join and they just kind of sit there and not do the execution initially. So
Yeah,
they join and they think once they've joined, they think, okay, that's it. That's all I had to do. And that barrier to like pull the trigger is really high. And then once they're in is actually when the real work starts. And a lot of people just kind of sit on the fence a little bit. But
yeah,
from what I've seen, it's very common. It's like quite overwhelming, to be honest, when you come in somewhere new, trying something different, and you see all these other students that are a little bit ahead of you as well. It can
mhm,
feel a little bit intimidating, but the ones that come through, they get through the academy, they apply to work, you know, the results just happen, which
yeah.
is really, really positive to see. Um, in terms of like specifics, like what you're doing now, like what from the academy, like the modules, the projects, the skills, are you using day to day now and like leaning on?
So this is going to sound almost generic, because literally everything that I learned from the academy, I've been able to utilize in some way,
Hmm.
from first principles all the way up through doing some of the Python work. I mean, I had already done some Python work in the past, but it was more like, you went through the specific use for it in the cloud, and that was helpful as well. I think what helped the most was we actually led through a couple of different projects leading up towards the end of the academy that I was able to use probably most throughout my interviews. So
Mm.
that was a big help. And then also I had actually started using some of the knowledge overall for um, building out EC2 and even Bastion hosts because that actually is a very common thing that is necessary. And I started doing that in my job before I even left my previous company and just showing like, hey, I can do this work. Here's what I'm capable of. And that was actually very, very useful, very practical, actually, day to day.
Yeah, really good stuff. And then the interview process itself, what was that like for the roles that you applied for?
Um, Overall, it was funny because the roles that I had gotten some interviews for, the questions weren't too in depth, but I also knew that had I not been through the academy, I wouldn't have been able to answer most of them. So
Yeah.
it was kind of funny that I thought to myself, well, I've been doing some of this work, but in terms of the terminology and how to go about explaining the knowledge, that was something that I was lacking. I didn't even realize I was lacking it because I'm socially I do pretty well, and so I thought, oh, I'll be able to wing it. Yeah, that was a bad idea. trying
Yeah.
to trying to wing it with this kind of knowledge, and so it was actually very helpful in terms of setting me up and just being able to explain the work that I was doing
Mhm.
and why I was working on a particular task, not just how I did it.
Yeah, I think that's a key to be able to explain the reasoning behind it.
Yeah,
It's a little bit like listing what EC2 and VPCs are by definition, but not be able to explain why they exist and what problems that they solve. So there's a big, big difference in the way you communicate.
yeah.
In terms of like the role that you were in, like what do you think actually got you hired in the end?
Um, It was probably actually a mix. So I had the background that I had, and I'd been working in tech for quite a while. And so they looked at that as valuable because they have a certain demands on years of experience and
Mm,
your educational background and certifications, but they also look at the kind of work that you've been doing, and they saw the transition of what I had placed on my resume as the work because I was doing, like I said, QA for a number of years, but then I started trying to pull myself out of that, and I showed a lot of the work that we had actually even done within the academy. So for a minute, I was also playing cloud support through the academy, and
yeah.
they actually really liked that aspect because they are very customer facing
Mm,
in so many of the roles within the government contracting space. And so they thought, okay, well, if he's done a mix of both, then that's great, especially because it was cloud. Cloud service desk is a little different from um, like IT service desk. And I wasn't doing service desk specifically, but the work that I was doing was sort of adjacent to it at
yeah.
first until I kind of drove myself into just working on the cloud and the infrastructure, which that's what I was more excited about. That's what they sort of sold me on with the role. And the personality matters a lot. And that's part of what I think also is really nice about the academy is that you're not just teaching people how to do the work, you're actually teaching them that it's very important to be a communicator,
Mhm.
and make sure that your knowledge is known to other people. Because if you don't communicate, a lot of typical engineers in this space, there's a stereotype that they're quiet and reserved and they
Yeah.
don't know how to talk to other people. And that is true, for a good portion of people out there. So you really do have to make sure that you work on that aspect of things because if you can't convey your knowledge, then a lot of people will just look past you.
Yeah, for sure. I think I always say great engineers have really good technical skills, like a really solid foundation, and can keep up with technology, but also the soft skills are like stand out.
Yeah.
It's like, to be honest, nowadays it's probably even more important than ever. Being able to use those soft skills and build the relationships and communicate up and communicate down and build rapport with people because fundamentally you're solving problems, and if you're solving problems, you need to be able to communicate, which is really important.
Yeah, and for me personally, I've looked at it over the years as the higher you climb, ironically, the more you have to communicate.
Yeah.
When you're doing the technical work in the weeds, you can just kind of be quietly hiding in a corner doing your work. But as you grow in your roles and take on more responsibility, communication becomes that much more critical.
Yeah, for sure. So, your current role then, what does that look like day to day?
It's actually a mix of different things because, like I said, in the public sector, they really care so much more about communication. Everybody has a role, so least privilege or zero trust. Those things are actually very, very active
Mm.
in the public space, and so that means that a lot of people have responsibilities that are split to a level that you wouldn't necessarily expect, especially if you work in the private sector. Like I have people who, again, work for these labs that they have to submit a change request, so a code change, and they have to do it through our team rather than doing it through their own team. And so we deal with a lot of different requests that come in, like code change is one thing, but they could say, oh, we're trying to get DNS set up on our side, and we're doing it through CloudFront, and we just don't know, how it's going to interact with these services. And so, my team actually is in charge of looking into the possibilities for them and communicating those possibilities, and also working with other teams internally through the government who would help facilitate that. And so we'll play an intermediary, but then also we're always working on the infrastructure side of things as well. And if there's any changes to the environment overall, because it's an organizations-based structure, and so everybody has an account access to log in, their own little partition section of AWS for them to work on, and all of that has to run smoothly and very securely. And so like I said, I do a mix between that support and the actual infrastructure work, and some security is tied into it. So I get a lot of what I want, and
Yeah.
then a lot of other work that it's useful because it actually makes you dive into services you probably wouldn't even think about using day to day because
Yeah.
everybody has different needs. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it keeps you on your toes, and that's the kind of work that helps you like learn things a lot faster because you
Yeah.
kind of have to, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Don't
you
have a
get
choice.
thrown.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like you have to do it basically, and it's like in one sense, it's like really good to do that because you'll get a much like a wider breadth of
Mhm.
exposure to skills and services, which is really, really good. What's like the biggest thing that's changed in your life since you've made the move from QA to obviously cloud?
Uh, I think passion,
Hmm.
honestly. The QA was making me feel a little down about
Yeah.
just the industry and the direction things were going. And I've constantly told my wife, like, I'm just really liking what I'm doing now.
Mm,
Like it's you could say, oh, it's a honeymoon phase, but it's really not because I've been doing this for 9 or 10 months,
mm.
in this specific kind of role now, and that that is something that I just really think I feel like I'm doing a more meaningful impact with, and that has been a lot more eye-opening for me than I thought because I'd gotten so used to doing what I was doing
Yeah.
and feeling kind of down with things that I forgot how just invigorating all of that was, and it's been a lot of fun. Yeah,
Yeah. And I think when you're going through that, and a lot of people go through that day to day and they're not really enjoying it, they don't think that change is possible. And then
yeah,
actually, if you put yourself through that process of making the change, on the other end, it's a completely different life, right? It's
yeah.
something that you enjoy, you get out of bed in a better mood, and you enjoy the work that you do. And work takes up so much of your life. So it's really important that you do something you enjoy, right? And
And I think a lot of people think, oh, well, I just need a job. It's like,
mm,
yes, but like you said, work takes up so much of your life. So you should be able to take a moment and think about what you'd like to do that would help you get through that so much of your life
yeah,
element. And, being able to find the joy and passion and all of that is pretty critical,
yeah,
personally. That's how I feel. Yeah.
yeah. For someone that's watching and who's exactly where you used to be, like Stark, doing things on their own, struggling, or maybe even like a little bit scared to make that leap from like a separate tech role or QA
Mhm.
or maybe support or help desk, and they're scared to make that jump into cloud. What would you kind of say to them?
I would say that it will take a lot of work. and it's worth it. But I think things that people have to take into consideration is obviously, they're like life circumstance, but
Yeah.
really you have to be able to make that decision for yourself and that you want to be serious about it because this is not simple work, if especially if you're taking on a new skill set, you need to be mentally prepared that it's going to require a lot from you, but at the same time it can be incredibly rewarding. But also you need to put in a lot more work.
Yeah.
The the market now is just as toxic as it was when I started in tech, because
Mm.
I started during the Great Recession here in America, and that was a terrible time. And now the landscape is kind of similar, and I feel bad for the current younger generation, but at the same time, you just have to keep driving. You know, look forward. Don't just focus on the minutia of the day to day because that will probably drive you into a hole.
Yeah.
And that's obviously not where you want to be. And but you have to put yourself out there. You have to, one thing that the academy really did was drive the importance of that social interaction, not just learning the tech, but also getting the message out there that you know what you're doing.
Mm.
And that is so critical. And going to the calls was very helpful because, we did more than just have you explain things of what was going on in the industry, doing things where we regularly went through different potential questions that you might get asked in an interview was also incredibly helpful. And participating in that way. And I think that a lot of people don't take that into consideration when they join something like any kind of boot camp really out there.
Yeah.
They just think like, oh, I just need to learn the work and then I should be good. And really, you're just avoiding taking on that responsibility of improving yourself socially. and
Yeah.
and that's very, very critical, especially in a cloud role.
Yeah.
Cloud is all about yes, computing, but it's also about interconnectivity. And you should take that and run with it in terms of a life lesson because
Mm.
that interconnectivity is not just about the technology, it's about the people too.
Yeah. Everything's about people fundamentally because you interact with people every day, right?
Yeah.
So maybe in different ways, in your QA role, you'd be, verifying that things are working. Now you're doing it in a different way, but fundamentally, you work with people, you can't avoid it, right? You can't
Yeah.
avoid it. And I think now more than ever, it's more important, especially when things are more remote. I don't know what your work setup is if you're remote or you go into the office, but a lot of jobs were remote and they're starting to come back into the office and people are a little bit uncomfortable. But it's like if you go to these morning stand-ups and you turn your camera on and you engage, it's like not that scary. And a lot of students still in the academy now, like they're a little bit skeptical, a bit scared, which is fine. It's very normal. But as time goes on, you can see them progressing and engaging more and turning on their cameras and posting. And, those students are always the ones that end up winning. So it's good that you've kind of experienced that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. What was the one thing you've learned about yourself through this journey that you've been on?
I would say that I can still do it. You
Mm.
get a little jaded with maybe the funk of the circumstance that you're in, and you have to just work to pull yourself out, but it, don't doubt. I mean, it's easy to say, but it's actually a very difficult thing to do. And I spent a lot of time doubting myself. My wife, would say, well, you're very capable and you get praise. I said, yeah, but not the praise that's getting me those
Yeah.
big wins,
Yeah.
and you you have to fake it till you make it. Even if you don't feel super confident,
Mm.
just just push through anyways. And I know it like I said, it's easier said than done. But it sort of takes, for a lot of people, if you get yourself into a rhythm, like a schedule, and hold yourself accountable to that schedule, even if you're not confident, slowly over time, you'll realize that you'll build some confidence.
Yeah, it takes day to day. I always said, I don't know if you remember, but I always used to say like day to day, nothing changes. But after a few
Yes.
months, you turn around, you look back and you've seen a massive progression that you've
Yeah.
made. So it's, when you're in the nitty gritty every day, you don't feel like you're making progress. But as time goes on, you keep showing up and keep doing the work. you look back after 6 months, you're like, hey, I'm a completely different person. I've learned so much, right?
Yeah,
Cool.
totally.
Love it. Anything else you want to end on?
No, just for anybody out there who's thinking about doing this, I would suggest that you just pull the trigger and do it because the program was actually quite helpful. And I hope that anybody who's taking all of this into consideration looks very seriously. Whether or not it ends up being this program,
Yeah.
cloud is a very big space. There's a lot of knowledge out there, and I personally benefited from this quite a bit. I hope that other people find what works for them as well.
Yeah. Love it, Blake. Great to catch up and looking forward to seeing your journey progress into cloud
Yeah,
security.
yeah, thanks, Sully. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Good to catch up. See you soon. Real quick, if you know that you've been jumping between certifications, tutorials, and career paths without actually committing to anything, I want to give you something completely for free. My team and I have built a school community where we've put together training videos and resources that will help you get the clarity that you're looking for when it comes to cloud engineering. It's completely free, link in the description below, and once you're in there, you will also see a full in-depth breakdown of my Cloud Engineer Academy and how the program is structured. And if you watch the breakdown and you are like, yes, this is for me, then you can just book a call with my team directly.